Rain never fell inside the Horfang Mountains, but the gold still felt cold every morning, as if the mountain itself refused to warm it. Deep within the highest peak, in a hall so wide that 100 dragons could stretch their wings without touching, lay the treasure of the Horfang clan, gathered by 100 generations of dragons who believed that worth was measured only in gold. Nib was the smallest dragon born that year, half the size of his brothers and sisters, with scales the color of wet stone instead of the bright green or deep red the older dragons admired. From the day he hatched, the other young dragons had teased him for his size, his crooked left wing, and worst of all, his habit of asking questions that nobody wanted to answer. Why did the clan need so much gold if none of it was ever spent? Why did the elders guard treasure they never even looked at twice? Why did the humans in the valley below get blamed for droughts the sky itself had caused? The elders called his questions foolish. His mother called them dangerous. So when Nib asked one too many questions during a clan gathering, the punishment came quickly. He was sent alone into the deep hoard, the oldest and least visited part of the treasure hall, to sort broken jewelry and tarnished coins for 3 full days. It was meant to bore him into silence. Instead, it gave him time to think, and time to look closely at things no one had looked at in centuries. The deep hoard was not like the polished, gleaming piles near the entrance. The ones visiting dragons were shown to prove the clan's wealth. This part of the treasure had been pushed back and forgotten, buried under dust and the discarded scraps of older, greedier hoarding. Nib worked slowly, more curious than obedient, running his claws through drifts of coins stamped with symbols he did not recognize, old crowns bent out of shape, and cracked pottery that must have come from human hands long before the current truce began. On the second day, his claw caught on something that did not move like the rest of the pile. He dug carefully, the way his mother had taught him when he was still small enough to be carried, and pulled free a single golden key. It was strange. Dragons did not use keys. Dragons did not lock anything, because nothing dared steal from a dragon, and dragons trusted nothing enough to lock it away from themselves. Yet here was a key, heavier than its size suggested, warm despite the cold of the hoard around it, with a pattern etched along its shaft that matched neither dragon script nor anything Nib had ever seen carved into the mountain. He turned it over in his claws for a long time. Something about it made the base of his skull prickle, a feeling he did not have words for yet, something between recognition and warning. He knew, without being able to explain why, that if he carried this key out into the open hall and set it on top of the sorted pile as instructed, something would change. He did not know what. He only knew that the feeling in his chest told him not to let it be seen. So Nib did something he had never done before. He disobeyed, quietly and completely. He wrapped the key in a scrap of old cloth from the pile and pushed it deep into a crack behind a loose stone at the back of the hall, a place even the elders rarely bothered to check because it was too small for any grown dragon to reach. Then he went back to sorting coins as if nothing had happened, his heart beating faster than it ever had during any scolding. That night, lying curled in the sleeping cave with his brothers and sisters, Nib could not stop thinking about the key. He told himself it was nothing, an old trinket from before his hatching, forgotten and unimportant. But the feeling would not leave him. It sat in his chest like a second heartbeat, insistent, telling him that the key mattered more than anything else buried in that mountain. 3 days later, when he was finally allowed to leave the deep hoard, the head of the clan's treasure keepers barely glanced at his work. No one asked if he had found anything unusual. No one seemed to know the key existed at all. That, more than anything, told Nib something important. If a piece of gold that strange had been forgotten for so long, buried by dragons who forgot nothing when it came to their hoard, then someone, long ago, had wanted it forgotten on purpose. He did not know yet what the key opened, or why it had been hidden instead of destroyed. He only knew that his own kind, careful and greedy and proud, had somehow lost track of one of the most important things in their entire mountain. And for reasons he could not yet explain, even to himself, Nib decided he would keep it that way. He would say nothing to his mother, nothing to the elders, and nothing to the clan. Whatever the key was for, whatever secret it guarded, it was his now, hidden where no dragon would think to look. He did not know it yet, but that quiet decision, made by the smallest and least respected dragon in the entire Horfang clan, was about to change everything for two species who had almost forgotten how to trust each other. Weeks passed before Nib gathered enough courage to ask anyone about the golden key, and even then, he was careful not to ask the wrong dragon. His mother would have taken it straight to the elders. His brothers and sisters would have laughed and told everyone just to see him get in trouble. There was only one dragon in the whole clan who Nib trusted to keep a secret, mostly because almost nobody else bothered to talk to him at all. Old Rill lived apart from the rest of the clan, in a shallow cave near the lowest tunnels where the young dragons rarely went. He had lost most of his sight decades earlier, in a rockslide the other dragons barely remembered anymore, and since then he had spent his days memorizing the old stories instead of hoarding gold. The younger dragons thought him strange, maybe even a little pathetic, a dragon with no treasure pile of his own. Nib had always thought he was the only interesting elder in the whole mountain. He found Old Rill exactly where he expected, curled around a small collection of stones that meant nothing to anyone but him, each one marking a memory instead of a coin's worth. Nib described the key carefully, without saying where he had found it or where he had hidden it, only its shape, its strange warmth, and the odd feeling it gave him. Old Rill went very still. For a long moment he said nothing, and Nib began to worry he had made a mistake. Then the old dragon asked him to describe the pattern along the shaft again, slower this time. And when Nib finished, Old Rill let out a breath that sounded almost like relief and almost like fear at the same time. He told Nib a story that no young dragon had heard in generations, one that had mostly been left out of the songs the clan sang about its own greatness. Long before Nib's grandmother was hatched, dragons and humans had fought a war so terrible that entire valleys had been burned to ash and entire dragon lines had been wiped out in a single season. The war had not ended because either side won. It had ended because both sides finally built something too dangerous for either of them to use again, and both sides had agreed, for once, to bury it together rather than let anyone else claim it. That something was sealed inside a chamber deep beneath the mountain, a place the old stories called the Wormheart Vault. According to Old Rill, the vault held two things side by side. One was a weapon, built in the final desperate months of the war, powerful enough to end either species for good. The other was something gentler, something the old stories barely mentioned because by the time peace came, no one wanted to be reminded of how badly both sides had needed it. A cure, Old Rill said, for a sickness called the wasting, the same sickness that still occasionally struck dragon eggs even now, and which, if the old healers were to be believed, struck human children with the same cruelty. The vault had been locked with a single key, one made in a way neither side alone could copy, and both dragons and humans had agreed to lose it on purpose, scattering it far from anyone who might be tempted to use it. Somehow, over the centuries, it had ended up buried in the Horfang clan's own treasure, forgotten along with everything else the dragons no longer valued. Nib left Old Rill's cave with his mind spinning, and he did not sleep at all that night. The key sitting hidden in the crack behind the loose stone was not just old gold. It was the only way into a place that held both a cure for a sickness killing dragon eggs and the power to end an entire species. It was 3 more days before Nib understood exactly how dangerous that truth had become. Slipping quietly past the entrance to the elders' meeting chamber on his way back from another chore, he heard his own name mentioned, and he stopped to listen instead of walking past. Inside, a large, scarred dragon named Grum was speaking to Vaunt, the matriarch of the clan and the closest thing Nib had to a grandmother in leadership. Grum's voice was low and urgent, the voice of a dragon trying to sound reasonable while pushing for something unreasonable. He spoke of the humans in the valley growing bolder every season, of old grazing lands lost to human farms, of a truce that favored the weaker side more than the stronger one. He spoke, carefully at first and then more openly, of an old legend about a vault beneath the mountain, and a weapon that could finally settle, once and for all, who truly ruled these lands. Vaunt did not agree immediately. She reminded Grum of the cost of the old war, of dragons who never returned, of nests that stood empty for a generation afterward. But she did not refuse him either, and that uncertainty in her voice frightened Nib more than anything Grum had said. He crept away from the chamber with his heart pounding, understanding at last why the key had been hidden so carefully and why some secrets were kept not to protect the ones who buried them, but to protect everyone who might come after. The search for the missing key began quietly, The way most dangerous things in the Horfang clan began, with a rumor passed between dragons who thought no one important was listening. It started 3 days after Nib overheard Grum and Vaunt talking in the meeting chamber. Someone, it seemed, had gone looking for the key themselves, likely at Grum's order, and found nothing where the old records suggested it should be. Word spread through the tunnels that something valuable was missing from the deep hoard, and though nobody said outright that a key was gone, Nib noticed how the elder's eyes lingered a little too long on any dragon who had recently worked in that part of the treasure hall. He was the only one who had. Nib spent the following days in a state of quiet panic he tried desperately to hide. He moved the key twice in a single week, first to a gap behind a fallen support beam near the old training grounds, then to a hollow beneath a boulder at the edge of the mountain where young dragons practiced their flying. Each time he moved it, he told himself it would be the last time, and each time, a fresh rumor or a suspicious glance from an older dragon convinced him it needed to move again. His mother noticed the change in him first. She asked why he had stopped eating properly, why he flinched whenever an elder walked past, why he had taken to sleeping curled as far from his siblings as the cave allowed. Nib told her he was simply tired from his punishment chores, and though she did not fully believe him, she did not press further, which made him feel worse rather than better. Grum was not so easily satisfied. He began appearing in places Nib happened to be, always with a reason that sounded almost natural, checking on training, inspecting the tunnels, speaking with the older dragons who supervised the youngest ones. But his eyes always found Nib eventually, and every time they did, Nib felt certain the older dragon could see straight through him. The breaking point came on a gray evening when Grum called Nib aside personally, in front of 2 other elders, and asked him directly whether he had noticed anything unusual during his time sorting the deep hoard. Nib forced himself to meet Grum's eyes and say no, that he had found nothing but broken jewelry and old coins, and though his voice did not shake, his heart pounded so hard he was certain everyone in the cave could hear it. Grum did not believe him. Nib could see it in the slow, considering way the older dragons studied him afterward, the same way a hunter studies tracks before deciding which direction to follow. That night, Nib made the hardest decision of his short life. He could not keep the key safe inside the mountain any longer, not with Grum circling closer every day, and he could not destroy it either, not when old real stories made clear how much both dragons and humans might one day need what it protected. There was only one option left. He would have to take the key somewhere Grum would never think to look, somewhere no dragon of the Horfang clan would willingly follow. He waited until the deepest part of the night, when even the oldest dragons slept, and retrieved the key from beneath the boulder at the training grounds with claws that trembled from more than just the cold. He wrapped it carefully against his chest, the way hatchlings sometimes carried their most treasured pebble, and climbed to the highest opening in the mountain, the one that led out over the cliffs facing the human valley below. A storm was building in the distance, dark clouds rolling in from the north, but Nib told himself there was no time to wait for better weather. Every hour the key stayed on the mountain was another hour Grum might find it. He spread his still growing wings, crooked left one and all, and launched himself into the night air before he could talk himself out of it. The wind hit him harder than he expected almost immediately, tossing his small frame sideways as rain began to needle against his scales. Flying in a storm was something even grown dragons avoided, and Nib was neither grown nor experienced, only frightened and stubborn in equal measure. He fought to keep himself steady, wings straining, the golden key pressed tight against his chest, as if his own body could shield it from the storm. Lightning split the sky somewhere close, and the crack of thunder that followed rattled through his bones. A sudden gust caught his crooked wing at the wrong angle, spinning him out of control, and the mountain, the storm, and the dark valley below blurred together into a single terrifying rush before the ground rose up to meet him. He did not remember hitting it. He only remembered, much later, opening his eyes to find himself lying in unfamiliar grass, far from any mountain, with pain screaming through his wing and a human boy staring down at him in open, wide-eyed shock. Daniel had gone out to check the grain shed before sunrise, expecting nothing more exciting than a fox that had gotten into the feed sacks again, and instead found a dragon. It was small, smaller than the stories back in the village always described, curled painfully in the corner of the shed with one wing bent at an angle that made Daniel's stomach turn just looking at it. Its scales were the gray of wet stone, dulled further by dried blood and mud, and its eyes, when they finally opened and found him, were not filled with the fire and fury every story warned him about. They were filled with fear, the same kind of fear Daniel imagined he would feel if their positions were reversed. He knew what he was supposed to do. Every child in the borderlands grew up hearing the same warnings, the same old stories about dragons who burned entire fields for the pleasure of watching them turn to ash, about the uneasy truce that had held for generations only because both sides mostly avoided each other. He was supposed to run to the village, sound the alarm, and let the older men deal with whatever this creature meant for their safety. Instead, Daniel found himself crouching slowly at the edge of the shed, close enough to see the dragon flinch, but not close enough to seem threatening, and asked, in a voice quieter than he expected, whether it was hurt badly. The dragon did not answer. Of course, not with words, but something in the way its body eased slightly, the way its guarded posture loosened just a fraction, told Daniel it had understood the question even if it could not respond to it. That was enough to convince him not to run for the village after all. Over the following days, Daniel kept the dragon hidden in the grain shed, sneaking out food and water while telling his family he was simply doing extra chores. He learned quickly that the creature understood far more than any story had ever suggested, following simple instructions, reacting to tone of voice, even seeming to understand entire conversations Daniel had with himself out loud while cleaning the wound along its wing. He started calling it Nib, a name it seemed to respond to almost immediately, as though it had chosen the sound itself simply by how eagerly its head lifted whenever Daniel said it. Nib's wing healed slowly under Daniel's careful, if amateur, attention, splinted with scraps of wood and cloth Daniel stole from around the farm. In the quiet hours they spent together, waiting for the injury to mend, something unexpected began to grow between them. Not quite friendship in the way Daniel understood friendship with other village children, but something close enough that the word did not feel entirely wrong either. It was during one of these quiet hours that Daniel first noticed the small bundle Nib guarded so carefully, tucked beneath his uninjured wing, even while sleeping. When Daniel finally worked up the courage to ask about it, Nib nudged the cloth aside just enough to reveal the golden key, and though Daniel could not have known its full importance, something about the careful, almost desperate way Nib protected it told him it mattered more than anything else in the world to the small dragon. Daniel had his own reasons to understand why something like that might matter. His younger sister had been sick for months with the wasting, a slow illness that stole strength and color from children across the borderlands every few years, one the village healer had no real cure for beyond rest and prayer. Daniel had watched his mother grow thinner from worry, watched his sister grow weaker despite every remedy tried, and had begun to understand, in the quiet, desperate way children understand things adults try to hide from them, that some sicknesses simply could not be fixed with what they had. When he mentioned his sister's illness to Nib, almost without meaning to, simply because the words had been sitting heavy in his chest for weeks, the small dragon went very still, staring at the golden key with an intensity Daniel had not seen from him before. Nib could not explain what he understood in that moment, not in any language Daniel could follow, but something in his chest ached with a recognition he had never expected to feel toward a human family. The wasting killed dragon eggs the same way it killed human children, slowly and cruelly. And here was proof, sitting right in front of him, that the sickness old Rill had spoken of was not just an old story from a war generations past. It was still happening now, on both sides of the mountain, unstopped and unstoppable, waiting for something only the golden key could unlock. For the first time since he had hidden it in the deep hoard, Nib began to wonder whether keeping the key hidden from everyone, even from the humans who might desperately need what it protected, was truly the safest choice after all. The dragons came on the evening of the 9th day, and the entire village saw them before Daniel did. He was inside the grain shed checking the splint on Nib's wing, now healed enough that the small dragon could hold it steady without wincing when the shouting started outside. By the time he pushed open the shed door, half the village had already gathered in the open field beyond the farmhouses, staring up at three dark shapes circling against the reddening sky. Daniel recognized the largest of them almost instantly, even from a distance, by the way Nib's whole body went rigid beside him. This was not a chance encounter. Someone had come looking specifically for the dragon hiding in his family's shed. Grum landed first, deliberately, in the open space between the village and the farmhouses, his wings kicking up dust and sending nearby chickens scattering in a panic. Two younger dragons landed behind him, clearly there for support rather than leadership, judging by how quickly their eyes darted toward Grum before either of them moved or spoke. The villagers, Daniel's own family included, backed away in a wave of fear that rippled through the crowd. Farmers who had spent their whole lives hearing stories about dragon attacks now facing the real thing for the first time. Someone shouted for weapons. Someone else shouted for calm. Daniel barely heard either, too focused on Nib, who had followed him out of the shed despite every instinct telling the small dragon to hide. Grum's voice, when it came, was calm in a way that felt far more dangerous than shouting would have been. He addressed Nib directly, ignoring the humans entirely, as though they were simply furniture cluttering the space between himself and what he had actually come for. He spoke of betrayal, of a clan disgraced by a hatchling's foolishness, and of a golden key that belonged to dragons, not to whatever creatures Nib had chosen to hide among. Nib did not answer immediately, and in the silence that followed, Daniel understood, with sudden and terrifying clarity, that whatever happened in the next few minutes would decide far more than just his own safety or his family's. It was Daniel who spoke first, stepping forward with empty hands raised, his voice shaking more than he wanted it to, but steady enough to be heard. He told Grum, and the gathered villagers, and Nib all at once, that the golden key was not stolen from anyone. It had been hidden by a creature trying to protect something too important to be used as a weapon, something that might save lives on both sides of the mountain if it was given the chance. Grum's expression twisted with something between amusement and contempt, clearly unimpressed by a human boy standing between him and what he wanted. He took a single step forward, wings flaring, and for a moment Daniel truly believed that step would be the last thing he ever saw. That was when Vaunt landed. She arrived without warning, dropping from the clouds in a way that made even Grum flinch, and the authority in her presence settled over the field like a physical weight. She had followed Grum from the mountain, she announced to everyone gathered, after finally deciding she could no longer ignore the questions old Rill had quietly brought to her days earlier, questions about a war neither side truly won, about a vault sealed by mutual agreement, and about a weapon that had no business being reclaimed by either species. Grum argued, insisting the humans could not be trusted with something so powerful that handing over the key would only invite disaster from the weaker side of the old truce. Vaunt's response was sharp enough to silence him, reminding him and everyone listening that it had been a dragon, not a human, who tried to steal the key from a hatchling in the first place, and a human boy, not a dragon elder, who had chosen to protect an injured stranger without asking what he might gain from it. The standoff did not end in violence, though for several long moments it felt close enough that no one in the field dared to breathe normally. Grum, faced with his matriarch's open disapproval and the unwavering, if terrified, defiance of both Nib and Daniel, eventually backed down, his wings lowering slowly as the fight visibly drained out of him, replaced by something closer to humiliation. As the tension finally broke, and villagers began cautiously lowering the tools and weapons they had grabbed in panic, Daniel felt Nib press close against his side, trembling with an exhaustion that had nothing to do with his healed wing. Whatever came next, Daniel understood that the small choice he had made 9 days earlier, to help rather than run, had somehow grown into something far larger than either of them had ever expected. No one slept much in the village that night, and by morning, an uneasy kind of truce had settled over the field where dragons and humans had nearly come to blows only hours earlier. Vaunt remained behind after Grum and the two younger dragons returned to the mountain, choosing to stay long enough to hear the full story Nib had been too frightened to tell anyone until now. With old Rill's earlier explanations to guide him, and Daniel standing close beside him for support, Nib finally spoke openly about finding the key in the deep hoard, about overhearing Grum's plans for a weapon buried alongside a cure, and about his growing certainty that neither dragons nor humans alone could be trusted to open the vault for the right reasons. Vaunt listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable through most of it, though Daniel noticed her gaze soften slightly whenever Nib described the sickness taking his sister's strength, the same sickness that had haunted dragon nests for generations under the name Wasting. When Nib finished, the matriarch was quiet for a long moment before admitting, in a voice that sounded almost tired, that she had known fragments of this old story her whole life and had simply chosen, like most of the clan, never to ask too many questions about them. The question of what to do next did not resolve quickly or easily. Some villagers argued the key should be destroyed entirely, that no vault built during a war that terrible could hold anything worth the risk of reopening it. Some dragons who arrived in the following days, drawn by rumors already spreading through both mountain and valley, argued the opposite, that the key belonged to dragonkind regardless of where it had been found or who had kept it safe. It was Nib, small and still not fully grown, who finally offered the solution that both sides eventually agreed to, hesitantly, and with more than a little suspicion on each part. The vault would be opened, but not by dragons alone, and not by humans alone either. It would be opened together, witnessed by both sides, with whatever was found inside shared and decided upon jointly rather than claimed by whichever species reached it first. Reaching that agreement took weeks of careful, often tense negotiation between Vaunt and the human elders from Daniel's village and the towns beyond it, conversations Daniel and Nib both sat in on more often than either expected, mostly because neither side fully trusted the other without them present. Through it all, the golden key itself remained exactly where Nib had decided to place it during those first frightened hours after the standoff, resting safely in Daniel's keeping rather than in any dragon's claws or any human council's vault. When the day finally came to open the Wormheart Vault, a small group gathered at the sealed entrance deep beneath the Horfang Mountains, dragons and humans standing shoulder to shoulder in a passage that had not felt footsteps or wing beats from either species in generations. Daniel carried the key himself, at Nib's insistence, stepping forward to fit it into a lock built long before either of them had been born. The mechanism resisted at first, stiff with age, until Nib added his own strength alongside Daniel's, small clawed hands and human hands working together on the same ancient door. When it finally gave way, the vault opened into a chamber untouched by time, holding exactly what the old stories had promised. On one side sat the weapon, still and silent, clearly built for a purpose no one gathered wanted to revisit. On the other sat vials and scrolls describing the cure for the wasting, preserved carefully by whoever had sealed this place away, waiting patiently for someone brave enough, or desperate enough, to come looking for it again. The weapon was resealed that same day, locked away once more by unanimous and immediate agreement from everyone present, dragon and human alike equally unwilling to let it see daylight a second time. The cure, however, was carried out into the world within days, studied by healers from both species working side by side for the first time in living memory, eventually finding its way to sick children and struggling nests across both mountain and valley, including, not long after, to Daniel's own sister. Nib was never again called the run of the clutch after that. The other young dragons who once mocked his size and his crooked wing now spoke of him with a kind of cautious respect, unsure exactly what to make of a hatchling who had defied every elder in the mountain and somehow been proven right. He did not seem particularly interested in that respect, choosing instead to spend most of his time exactly where he had first learned to trust someone outside his own kind, in the fields near Daniel's village, watching a fragile new alliance take its first uncertain steps. Daniel, for his part, never forgot that the entire fragile peace between two species had once rested on a single choice made in a grain shed before sunrise, the choice to help rather than run. It was a choice, he often told his sister once she was well enough to hear the whole story properly, that any human might have made, if only they had been brave enough, or curious enough, to look a frightened stranger in the eye instead of turning away.